Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as AISA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. Welcome back to Cyber Voices, live backstage at Canberra CyberCon 2025. I'm joined today by Raymond Schippers. Raymond, hello, welcome.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So, Raymond, where are you joining us from? You've come up from Melbourne for the Canberra event?
Yeah, drove up from Melbourne for the event. It's been fantastic. Really enjoyed it this year.
Cool. And you're a CISO, right?
CISO, Chief Nerd Officer.
Chief Nerd Officer, I love that.
We're multiple hats, but I'm co-founded a consultancy.
Amazing. And how have you been enjoying the conference so far?
It's been fantastic. It's an amazing network opportunity, and it's really a great time to catch up with customers, with partners, and just everyone in the industry, and kind of hear what's happening, what the trends are, and some fantastic talks as well.
Amazing. Yeah. Did you say you drove up?
Yes.
Wow. That's a good 10-hour drive, isn't it?
It's about 7 hours.
7 hours? Okay. Yep. Cool.
It wasn't too bad. Nice and relaxing though on a Monday.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been too bad. I've done the drive a few times myself because I used to live here in Canberra, but I've always got my dog with me. So I think it becomes 10 hours because I need to stop so the dog can do its thing. Yeah. Is it your first time to Canberra CyberCon?
First time to Canberra CyberCon, yeah. So, but it's been an awesome experience. Really enjoyed it.
Have you just delivered your talk today or was it yesterday?
It was yesterday morning. I was fortunate to be one of the first up, so get it out of the way.
Hey, what was your topic?
Yeah, my topic was about moving from kind of reactive security to much more resilient proactive security using threat-informed defense. And I was very well received. We had a lot of attendees, which was really good to see, especially first thing kind of in the morning.
Yeah.
People still coming in. So a lot of people took a lot of notes and asked some great questions afterwards.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the talk.
Yeah, so one of the key things I'm kind of talking about a lot lately with a lot of organizations and people in general is moving to a threat-informed defense approach to cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I was the cyber defense engineering director at Canva, and that was kind of the approach we took there to build up our cybersecurity capabilities. It's using intelligence to understand our adversaries and their behaviors, and really then focus our limited resources on the most critical and most impactful things we can do in security to stop our adversaries being successful in compromising our networks and detecting them early. Today, we find a lot of organizations still have a very much compliance-focused approach to cybersecurity. And unfortunately, that's not resulting in many wins, because what we're seeing is security and compliance requirements are typically lagging indicators. They'll create a regulation, they'll create a compliance framework about something that has happened. And just due to the nature of bureaucracy, of standards and things like that, you're typically 5 to 7 years down the road prior to it becoming part of a standard. ISO 2007-1, I think, is a great example, where on average it's about being updated every 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the change of adversaries in that time is so drastic that it's impossible to keep up focusing purely on compliance. So shifting to threat-informed defense, where you understand your adversaries and you're constantly testing your capabilities as well. So doing adversary simulations, using breach attack tools, things like that, to actually understand what is your security capability and kind of really test it in the real world. And that allows you to really focus your limited resources. No one has all the budgets. No one has all the stuff that they want on what is the most impactful, because you'd map out kind of how do the adversaries behave? How are they most likely compromise us? And you look for those choke points and you kind of focus there.
I love that point around a compliance-driven approach and how that's probably more just ticking a box. Compliance is there for a reason, absolutely. But I think I say within the organizations I work for as well, that's our minimum barrier to entry. That's our license to play. Can you walk us through then, this concept of a threat-informed defense mindset and how you've seen that transforming traditional security programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree. Like, compliance is critical in building trust between organizations, regulations and things like that. So definitely not saying compliance is bad and we should get rid of it. And it's, a great measure of how tall you need to be on this ride.
Mhm.
But with threat-informed defense, it's kind of a cyclical nature as well.
Mhm.
Cybersecurity, previously I've seen, has been very much large projects, we deliver an outcome, and we move on to the next thing. But with the agile nature of our adversaries, with the constantly evolving threat landscape, we need to kind of shift into much shorter kind of sprints, a bit like software delivery,
Mhm.
kind of taking learnings from them on short, quick sprints. And so what we're seeing is organizations really starting to understand their adversaries, who are the biggest threats to them, what are their capabilities, what is their intent, and then mapping kind of that out using MITRE ATT&CK, and there's various other open source capabilities for that. And then once you kind of map that out, you'd evaluate yourself against them. So you'd say, hey, we know that adversary X will do X, Y, and Z. And then you'd say, okay, what are our capabilities? And it's when you choose what's called a course of action. So you look, hey, do we even have the logs to detect that this happened? Can we identify it? Do we have detections in our SIEM, or can we prevent it from even happening? Or can we do some deception? So with identity-based attacks, honey tokens, for example, allow you to kind of deceive and trip up your adversary and give you advanced warning. And you kind of pick an adversary, pick a few of their most common techniques, probably the most critical ones kind of early on in the attack chain. You test and you perform a self-evaluation, probably run some breach simulation tools and understand what's your gap. And then you can go hopefully resolve those gaps either by creating detections or kind of choosing your courses of action. And then you rinse and repeat. And it's just that constant evaluation cycle. But one of the key things as well is like once you start building your defenses, it's really important to not just have kind of a manual IR playbook or, yes, we've implemented an EDR, we're good to go. It's critical that organizations then look at it, okay, when the EDR fires, what's our automated response? What's our playbooks once that happens for these specific techniques?
Yep.
And it's critical to keep mapping it back to techniques because then when something does fire and something does happen, it provides crucial context to the responders. But it also means you're not creating wide kind of random detections based off someone's random hypotheses. You're actually creating detections and capabilities based off actual evidence from intelligence, from adversary capability. And so then when it's time to investigate, when it's time to respond, okay, these are the most likely next steps. And so our automated response should focus on these next steps. And that starts to reduce the noise as well for your operational teams because you'll have much more refined alerts looking for much more specific things, and there'll be much more higher fidelity. And then as part of your kind of ongoing improvement process with this all, it's really important as well to start understanding what is the resilience of your capabilities? How easy are they to bypass? And there's been a fantastic project launched by the Center for Threat Informed Defense called Summiting the Pyramid, where it gives you a scoring mechanism to look at your capabilities and go, okay, this is actually reasonably easily bypassed. It kind of gets a score of 1A, and we should start shifting up the pyramid to have a much better one. And it's not something organizations can do overnight, but it's definitely a crucial shift in kind of how cybersecurity strategies is thought about, rather than looking at, okay, SOC 2 requires us to do this, ISO 2007 requires this. Is much more, okay, our adversaries are capable of doing these things. This is what they've been seen to be doing. We should really have defenses in these areas. And that will support, naturally, compliance and everything else.
Well, you've hit on something interesting there. When you said it doesn't happen overnight, there's probably a lot of organizations that are struggling even to meet those compliance requirements. How does one get started out, especially if they're barely even scraping through on their existing requirements?
Yeah, it's really situational and contextual. But like the general kind of advice would be get good intelligence, work with ACSC, work with industry partners, work with your ISAC to understand what adversaries are they seeing. Probably pick one adversary and their kind of top 3 most common or most impactful techniques that they're using, and just start with that. Like it is really easy to try and boil the ocean to say, okay, hey, this adversary has 20 known techniques. We should map all of them and look at all of them. Another common mistake that we see is people using the MITRE ATT&CK kind of matrix as a coloring in book. It's not. You're not supposed to color in all the cells and have detections for everything. It's really important to just start small. And I think, compliance requirements is a great example. There's a lot of requirements now coming out around multi-factor authentication. I know that's still a struggle for a lot of organizations, unfortunately. And so if you are looking at a multi-factor authentication project, for example, have a look at your adversaries and how they gain access. You'll find most of them will use phishing.
Yep.
And so that's probably a great natural first step. But then understand, okay, if they're doing phishing, are they doing, OTP replay attacks? The answer, unfortunately, today is yes, they most likely will be.
Mm-hmm.
So that really then starts to give you evidence that you need to go to your executives, whoever kind of helps fund you, to say, hey, this MFA project, we have to have phishing resistant MFA. Like there's no point rolling out OTP or kind of push notification MFA because we're seeing adversaries just bypassing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can, even if you're embarking on those projects today, you can kind of leapfrog, hopefully, and kind of learn on the lessons. But yeah, the key thing is to start small, start with, 2 or 3 things and iterate over that and start to build the muscle to do this as well. It's not always easy, but the critical thing is that because it's so cyclical, even if you don't get it perfect around the first time, you can come back and continue to evaluate.
Yeah. You've hit on some points there, which I've been discussing with a few of the speakers who've been coming in to chat to me. And I've been challenging people on, some of the things that we're talking about here are great for, larger organizations with the resources, right? And what advice do we have for those who perhaps don't have, the resources that maybe you had at Canva or elsewhere? And your advice sounds very similar, right? It's like, it's okay to not be perfect, but, you got to start somewhere, right? Would you say that that's kind of what if a smaller organization was to hear your talk and, think, well, I don't have the resources, I don't have the team, like, where would you encourage them to begin?
Yeah, definitely starting small and definitely starting with identity.
Yeah,
like if you're looking at kind of the attack surface and, if you don't have, kind of even just looking at the recent ACSC reports out of the US and elsewhere, identity is just where we're seeing the attacks. And I think the huge misconception that we're actually kind of talking about as an industry is phishing resistant MFA, fantastic. But there's a really and there, and that is session lifetimes.
Yes.
So one of the huge threats that we're seeing is just info stealers. Info stealers are rampant across Windows, Mac as well now. And as a result, they'll steal your session cookie. And for example, most organizations don't realize that the default lifetime, or was at least when I last looked, was 90 days on Enter ID, so Active Directory in Azure. And so if they steal the cookie, the adversary can be in for 90 days without ever having to use your second factor or having to log in.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that as part of any identity project or using multi-factor, you also look at your session lifetimes.
Oh, yeah.
Because time and time again, that's what we're seeing. The recent Bybit compromise turns out it was one of their suppliers, SafeWallet, and it was because of compromised session tokens. They ran into MFA, the adversaries, the North Koreans ran into MFA, couldn't bypass it, but they just kept stealing the active sessions from the device. And so definitely just keeping an eye on session lifetimes and really reducing down those.
And what are we talking about here? In a zero trust kind of world, we should be session lifetimes, would you say, no more than a day or 8 hours?
Yeah, it really depends on the system you're protecting as well.
Of course, yeah.
For your email, you probably want something a little bit shorter. If you're in finance, reasonably short because we're constantly seeing, BEC and things like that. But if it's, your timesheet system, you can probably have a longer time session time there. But like in the zero trust world, like definitely as well, locking down where you can access a system from.
Yes.
And like, okay, we have, you can then extend your session lifetimes, but if you're saying it can only ever come from a company device, that starts to reduce the risk as well.
Yeah, I like that. And those are some real simple changes that an organization can make with identity and access management that will make a huge difference. I've said to a few people before, right, if you want to start somewhere similar to your advice, start with building resilience through good identity management, because that's where that's the entry point that's going to be used to do further damage. So I like that, just getting your MFA off the ground, reducing session limits, thinking about where you can be accessed from and how you're alerting on that as well can make a huge difference. I think the challenge there can sometimes be, if you're an organization that's not used to that, is how you get them comfortable with the additional friction.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically we'd combine that with like a passwordless or something like that. So then instead of typing in a password that they need to remember, it just becomes a biometric authentication.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they go, oh, that's much simpler. I don't have to remember my password. I don't have to change my password.
Yeah.
And so you can do that. And definitely you want to reduce friction where possible. But I've seen a lot of organizations go too much to reducing friction.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you want friction.
Yes.
Because if you're doing a large financial transaction, for example, you want somebody to really stop and think and go, is this the right thing?
100%.
And so definitely I'd caution people to completely removing friction at all times.
Yeah. And that can sometimes come down to the organization and the mindset of the leadership. I know in one of my previous roles, the big bosses were all like, no, we don't want the risk. You introduce as much friction as possible. But then I've worked other places, they're like, is there another way we can do this? I've been exploring that myself, right? Talking about passwords and how often they're changed and all that kind of stuff is trying to, use biometrics so that, people don't have to use their passwords, which is really cool. So how was the talk received? What kind of questions did you get? Like what was the interest level like?
Yeah, definitely a lot of questions around kind of KPIs and metrics for these kinds of programs.
Okay.
At a larger scale, like how do you tell a board, yes, we're improving?
Mm-hmm.
And that really comes down to, again, like mapping out your adversaries, mapping out their techniques and showing, okay, these are the techniques that we're most concerned about. These are the capabilities we've now delivered to deal with this. But also, again, coming back to the summiting the pyramid, that is, you can then show the resilience of your defensive controls as well. I know there's quite a few organizations out there today kind of taking that approach as well, which is mapping out their environment and then kind of mapping that against kind of their adversaries of concern and using that as kind of the risk matrix that they're presenting to the board to say, hey, we have these huge weaknesses here. We know our most likely adversaries are going to do that. And rather than kind of showing the weaknesses from an ISO 2007-1 audit, you're showing the weaknesses from an ACSC report and going, hey, the ACSC has said this is actually happening out in industry. We should be concerned about it. This is how resilient we are to it. This is the investment that we need to bring us up to this level.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on something else I was thinking about asking you then was, boards and executives, compliance is usually their key measure, and how do you break them away from that? How have you found balancing the resource and costs of maintaining the audit versus your very proactive approach?
We've seen using this proactive approach significantly reduces the cost of the audit because you have the evidence on hand that you're testing. You have the evidence on hand, you're doing constant risk assessments, and you should have the evidence on hand that you're doing what you say. So it actually significantly makes audits actually easier.
Yeah.
And that's what we found as well in my time at Canva. Like audits for us were significantly simplified when we were using this approach because the auditor would say, okay, show us that you're testing your controls and your control effectiveness. Well, we had our automated system and we could give them a report from any time of day. And so it actually really helped with that. And because, most compliance requirements, most audit requirements do come from some basis, in fact, of, hey, you need to have MFA because single factors kept getting compromised. And so that is based on actual adversary activity. Okay, it's from a long time ago and it's, it should be phishing resistant, those kinds of things, but you're still meeting those requirements. So naturally through this process, you're still adhering to kind of compliance. If there is, something very compliance specific that's just that, then yeah, absolutely as part of kind of your risk control process, you need to kind of call that out to the security team and they just need to do it. But we found that at least kind of 99% of requirements you easily meet through this process because they are still generated typically because of something that's happened in the past.
Well, thank you so much, Raymond, for imparting your wisdom upon our members here at CyberCon 2025 and for your time. And thank you so much for sharing your voice with us.
Thank you very much for having me, David. It's been awesome.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sonar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@aisa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an ASA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An ASA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at asa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.